Correction, not so good. The correct answer to sex is not at least once a week. You should put male or female.
Hey, not sex with male.
They were one of British television's biggest hits. Then the network's own boss cancelled them, calling the show he'd greenlit offensive. Behind that contradiction, a teacher who died in a locked house nobody explained, a student secretly pregnant on set, and a quiet Swedish girl who was secretly a legendary director's daughter. 49 years later, this is where they all are. Number 1 is Barry Evans, who played Jeremy Brown, the endlessly patient teacher trying to hold a room of impossible students together, and whose own life ended in a mystery that has never been solved. He was 34 when the show premiered, born Barry Joseph Evans on June 18, 1943, in Guildford, Surrey.
I see. Are you right wingo or left wingo?
Right or left?
Orphaned as a baby and raised in a Barnardo's home in Twickenham, he won a scholarship to the Central School of Speech and Drama, and by his 20s was being called one of Britain's brightest young film stars.
What is this?
It is orange.
Orange.
After Here We Go Round the Mulberry Bush. He never married and had no children, and for decades the private side of his life stayed almost entirely out of view. It wasn't until a 2024 Channel 4 documentary, Saucy: Secrets of the British Sex Comedy, that his story was revisited publicly, with Radio Times describing how he had spent his career hiding his true sexuality, even while receiving on-screen advances from women in his own films. Mind Your Language made him a household face across the country, but by the mid-1990s, the offers had dried up, and he was driving a minicab in Leicestershire just to get by, once writing to the network simply to say he was still alive. In February 1997, police came to his bungalow to tell him his stolen taxi had been recovered. They found him already dead on the sofa, a blow to his head never explained, his blood alcohol 4 times the legal limit, and beside him a spilled, decades-old packet of aspirin he apparently never touched, along with a handwritten note reading only, "You were always good to me, so you inherit." The coroner ruled acute alcohol poisoning and recorded an open verdict. An 18-year-old man was arrested and later released without charge. He was 53 and was cremated at Golders Green Crematorium. A blue plaque now marks the London home he once lived in. Jeremy Brown spent 4 seasons patiently teaching a room full of strangers how to be understood. Barry Evans spent his final years trying to be remembered at all, and died in a house with the phone line cut and the truth still locked inside it. Number 2 is Anna Bergman, who played Ingrid Svensson, the dreamy Swedish au pair whose crush on Mr. Brown reshuffled the entire classroom's love triangle.
There's wrong something with me?
And who was quietly the daughter of one of the greatest film directors who ever lived. She was born on May 5, 1948 in Stockholm to Ingmar Bergman and his first wife, choreographer Ellen Lundstrom, one of 9 children her father would eventually have across 5 marriages. A sprawling and famously complicated family that included half-siblings she shared little public relationship with, among them the writer Lynn Ullman. She was 30 years old when she joined the cast in the show's second series in 1978.
Win for my black bottle.
What almost nobody on set knew was what she'd been doing in the years just before that, appearing in a string of British sex comedies with titles like Come Play With Me and Adventures of a Taxi Driver, films her father's towering reputation in serious cinema never once acknowledged and never once helped. She joined the class playing an au pair with a habit of putting every sentence in the wrong order, left after the 3rd series, and came back again for the 1986 revival, one of only a handful of actors from the original run to return at all. Along the way, she even appeared in one of her father's own films, Fanny and Alexander, in a small role that finally put her on screen alongside his name instead of quietly beneath it. Her final role came in 1990 in Avalon, after which she stepped away from acting altogether and has stayed almost entirely out of public life since. Ingrid Svensson wanted nothing more than Mr. Brown's attention for 2 entire seasons. Anna Bergman carried one of cinema's most famous surnames through a decade of British sitcoms and British sexploitation films alike, and almost nobody in that studio ever knew whose daughter was standing in the back row. Number 3 is Pik-Sen Lim, who played Chung-Soo Lee, the fierce young communist forever quoting her copy of Chairman Mao's Little Red Book, and who was, in real life, the daughter of a Malaysian palm oil millionaire who never wanted her anywhere near a stage.
You from?
Democratic Republic of China.
She was 32 when the show premiered, born Lim Fik Seng on September 15, 1944, in Penang, then part of British Malaya. She defied her family at 16 to move to London and study drama, later marrying the Doctor Who writer Don Houghton, who cast her in one of her earliest television roles, a job she took while secretly pregnant, terrified that if the producers found out, they would replace her before shooting finished. She still had to fake fainting on camera without anyone realizing the risk was real. The marriage produced a daughter, Sarah, who became an actress herself, but she and Houghton divorced years before his death in 1991. Mind Your Language made her one of the most recognizable Asian faces on British television for 2 straight decades, delivering deliberately tangled dialogue that scriptwriter Vince Powell built specifically around her.
Try saying, "Round the rugged rock, the ragged rascal ran."
Down the lugged lock, the lugged
Later in life, she said watching clips of herself goose-stepping in a Red Army uniform left her ashamed, and that it took her years to shake off what the role had cost her. A stigma so lasting that she called it, in her own words, absolutely awful to watch back. She kept working anyway for another 40 years, right up through a 2019 comedy series, a role as the Queen's would-be assassin opposite Rowan Atkinson, and even the narration for a series of video games late in her career. She died on June 9, 2025, at 80. Soo Lee never once put down her little red book. Pik-Sen Lim spent the second half of her life making peace with the role that made her famous and the one that never let her forget its cost. Number 4 is Françoise Pascal, who played Danielle Favre, the amorous French au pair who had every man in that classroom, and Mr. Brown especially, completely off balance.
Lucky to have such good
and whose own love life was every bit as dramatic as her characters. She was 27 when the show premiered, born on October 14, 1949, on the island of Mauritius, and educated in both Paris and London. She broke into British film in the late 1960s before Peter Sellers cast her opposite him in There's a Girl in My Soup. She spent 11 turbulent years involved with the married film star Richard Johnson, with whom she had a son in 1976, the same year Johnson divorced his third wife to marry his fourth, an entanglement she rarely discussed publicly at the time. She once turned down a lead role from Kirk Douglas himself over lunch at a Mayfair restaurant, simply because she'd already committed to another film. In 1971, a house fire nearly killed her. She fell 3 floors onto a set of railings, escaping the flames, and broke her arm and dislocated her shoulder. She left for Hollywood in the early 1980s, worked steadily in American television, including a stint on The Young and the Restless, and eventually returned to England in 1987, where she still occasionally acts and produces today, having signed on for a new comedy series as recently as 2015. Danielle Favre spent 3 seasons chasing Mr. Brown's attention across every lesson. Françoise Pascal spent those same years surviving a fire, a decade with a married Hollywood leading man, and a turned-down offer from Kirk Douglas, and somehow made every bit of it look effortless on screen. Before we get to the rest of the classroom, a question for the comments. Which moment do you still remember best? Ranjeet's 1,000 apologies, Soo Lee's Little Red Book, Miss Courtney's icy stare, or Giovanni chasing Danielle around the desks? Tell me in the comments. I read every one. If you haven't subscribed yet, every birth record, death certificate, and career fact in this script was verified before a single word was written. Your subscription keeps that standard possible. Number 5 is Dino Shafeek, who played Ali Nadim, Ranjeet's constant sparring partner in the show's funniest verbal duels, and whose life ended so suddenly that the cast barely had time to process it. He was 47 when the show premiered.
You are waiting for me to speak an answer.
Born Ghulam D. Shafi on March 21, 1930, in Dhaka. He immigrated to Britain in 1958 and trained at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, already carrying stage experience from home. His screen debut came in the 1967 film The Long Duel, and his career built slowly through the following years until It Ain't Half Hot Mum gave him a national catchphrase of his own, Charwala Muhammad's cry of Chai Garam Chai, years before Mind Your Language made him famous a second time.
Oh, I must go, Ranji. Duty is calling. Salam.
Off camera, he was known for staying almost entirely out of the spotlight, avoiding interviews and premieres, despite being one of the most recognized faces on British television. On March 10, 1984, 11 days before what would have been his 54th birthday, he died suddenly of a heart attack at his home in London. Ali Nadim spent every episode locked in comic battle with Ranjeet, never backing down. Dino Shafeek never got the chance to grow old in the career he'd finally built, and the show's writers had to quietly explain his absence to an audience who had no idea anything was wrong. Number 6 is Zara Nutley, who played Miss Courtney, the steely headmistress who ran that night school like a military camp, and who didn't land her signature role until she was already 53 years old, after decades of theater work most audiences never saw. She was born Zara Mary Chip Jabber on August 19, 1924, in Cornwall, England. She came up through repertory theater after a stint in amateur drama, trained and later taught at a drama studio in Hove through the 1950s, and performed under several variations of her birth name before settling on the one the country would come to recognize. Beyond Mind Your Language, she found a second signature role in the later seasons of Never the Twain, playing another sharp-tongued spinster named Eleanor with the same exacting comic timing that had made Miss Courtney so effective. She died in Uckfield, East Sussex on October 9, 2016, at the age of 92. Miss Courtney terrified an entire classroom with a single glare and never raised her voice to do it. Zara Nutley waited more than half a century for the role that would define her, and then made every second of it count. Number 7 is Kevork Malikian, who played Max Papandreou, the love-struck Greek shipping clerk who never once got a metaphor right, and who was training to become a priest in an Armenian orphanage before anyone ever handed him a script. He was 34 when the show premiered, born on June 2, 1943, to Armenian genocide survivors in Diyarbakir, Turkey. Sent to a seminary in Istanbul as a boy, it was there, reciting Shakespeare for a visiting English teacher, that a priest first suggested he try acting instead of the priesthood. He moved to London in 1963 on a scholarship few people back home believed he deserved, later earning his acting and teaching diplomas from Rose Bruford College, and in 1965 married Maida, also of Armenian descent, with whom he had a daughter, Sonia, and a son, Sivan, who grew up to become a painter. Mind Your Language became his breakout role at 18 million viewers a week, but it was only the beginning. He went on to play the prosecutor in Midnight Express, a film that went on to win 2 Academy Awards, and a decade later, Steven Spielberg personally cast him as Kazim, guardian of the Holy Grail, in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. He still works steadily today, appearing in Turkish television dramas well into his 80s. Max Papandreou never once got a big word right in 4 seasons of trying. Kevork Malikian escaped a childhood built for the priesthood and ended up standing across from Harrison Ford in one of the biggest films of the 1980s. Number 8 is Robert Lee, who played Taro Nagazumi, the endlessly polite Japanese businessman who bowed and added "oh" to nearly every word he spoke, and who held a Cambridge history degree years before anyone in London ever offered him an acting job. He was 63 when the show premiered, born Robert Yafu Lee on November 30, 1913, in Tianjin, China. He earned a history degree from Trinity College, Cambridge, arrived in Britain as an international scholar, and worked in Asian restaurants across the country before friends convinced him to try the stage instead. He spent 3 decades quietly building film and television credits, including a role in You Only Live Twice, appearances in The Avengers and The Chinese Detective, and later spots in The Bill, never marrying and living alone in a modest Hampstead flat for the rest of his life, once saying plainly in an interview that marriage was too much responsibility for a man in his line of work. He remained active in the industry well into his 70s. He died on December 1, 1986, one day after turning 73, following a 2-year illness, just as the show's final revival series was wrapping. Taro Nagazumi bowed politely through every misunderstanding the classroom threw at him. Robert Lee earned a Cambridge degree, spent decades in quiet obscurity, and became a household name only in the last years of his life. Number 9 is Jamila Massey, who played Jamila Ranja, the Indian housewife who couldn't write her own name in English when she first walked into that classroom, and whose real path to acting ran directly through her own mother's refusal to let her near a drama school. She was 43 when the show premiered. Born on January 7, 1934, in Shimla, then part of British India. She arrived in Britain from Shimla at 12, alongside a father who had fought in the war and stayed on to become a BBC producer, studied Latin, Urdu, and English at King's College London, and had to work around her mother's outright refusal to let her attend drama school, resorting to covert means just to land her first roles. Unlike several of her castmates, her personal life stayed steady rather than turbulent. She married writer and historian Reginald Massey, and the two built a decades-long creative partnership together, co-authoring several books on Indian music and dance. Mind Your Language gave her a national profile, but her most personal triumph came years later when she was finally cast as Auntie Satya on BBC Radio's The Archers, a role she'd wanted her entire life and had once been forced to turn down. She went on to play Neelam Kapoor on EastEnders through the late 1990s, returned to Coronation Street in 2010 playing one of Sunita's aunts, and still occasionally acts today, living quietly in Wales. Jamila Ranja slowly learned to read and write in a language that wasn't hers. Jamila Massey spent a lifetime being told what she couldn't do, and built one of British broadcasting's longest careers doing exactly that anyway. Number 10 is Ricardo Montez, who played Juan Cervantes, the charming Spanish bartender with a thick accent and the mischievous grin, and who wasn't born Ricardo Montez at all. He was 53 when the show premiered, born Levi Isaac Atias on September 20th, 1923 in Gibraltar. His family was evacuated to England during the war before he returned home afterward, drifting between jobs until actor Frankie Vaughan spotted him in a 1958 film and personally told him to pursue acting under a more Latin-sounding stage name. He moved to London in 1962 and became the industry's reliable choice for Spanish-speaking roles for the next 2 decades, with credits on The Saint, Doctor at Sea, and Casualty, right through to a small cameo in Mamma Mia in 2008, his very last appearance on screen. He split his time between Richmond and his beloved Gibraltar for the rest of his life, married to Aravda Hatchwell since 1953, with one daughter and a granddaughter he doted on in his later years. He died of cancer on October 26, 2010, at his daughter's home in Spain, aged 87. Juan Cervantes poured drinks and charm in equal measure for 4 seasons. Ricardo Montez built an entire screen career on a name and an accent that weren't originally his, and made both feel completely his own. And then there are the 3 whose classroom lives were the most fully documented, and whose personal lives, oddly, are the least. Albert Moses played Ranjeet Singh, the turbaned Sikh whose soft, "1,000 apologies" became one of British sitcom's most quoted lines. He was 39 when the show premiered, born on December 19, 1937, in Kandy, Sri Lanka, and had already made documentary films across Africa before he ever set foot on that classroom set, going on to become fluent in 6 languages and skilled in fencing, karate, and motorcycling on the side. He didn't just act in the show, he produced 13 of its episodes himself. He died in London on September 15, 2017, at 79, and was laid to rest back home in Gampola. Despite a public profile that spanned 5 decades and 2 James Bond films, almost nothing about his marriages or family life was ever put on the record. George Camiller played Giovanni Capello, the hot-blooded Italian forever chasing Danielle around the classroom, and is one of only 4 students to appear in every series the show ever made. Born in Surrey in 1942 to Italian parents, he trained at the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, appeared in The Message alongside Anthony Quinn before Mind Your Language, and kept working steadily for decades afterward in Mike and Angelo, Peak Practice, and Judge John Deed. He still lives quietly in Hampstead and gives interviews about the show today, but of his personal life beyond acting, nothing has ever been published. And Jackie Harding played Anna Schmidt, the disciplined German au pair with the punch to prove it, appearing in all 42 episodes across the show's full run, one of its most consistent presences. No verified birth date or birthplace for her survives in any public record at all. Her only other confirmed credits are a small role in the 1979 remake of The Lady Vanishes, and a handful of British television appearances through the late 1970s, after which the public record simply goes quiet. No further work, no interviews, nothing. Between them, these three actors gave the show more screen time than almost anyone else in this cast, and left behind less of themselves than anyone on this list. They aired their first episode in 1977. They aired their last in 1986, cancelled by LWT's own director of programs, who decided the show that had made him millions was too offensive to continue. 4 series, 18 million viewers a week at its peak, broadcast into more than 40 countries around the world. Today, more than half of that classroom is gone. One in an unexplained mystery in a Leicestershire bungalow. One carried home to Sri Lanka. One who never reached his 54th birthday. One who waited 53 years for her defining role. And one whose death this year closed the book on a story that ran for 8 decades. The rest are scattered across England and Wales, still working, still occasionally recognized on the street for a classroom that closed its doors a generation ago. But nobody ever tracked down what happened to the girl who played Anna Schmidt. Some students, it turns out, leave the room and are simply never seen again.